Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's live lecture. Today we're going to be talking about correctional programs and services. And basically what that includes is treatment. Treatment is very, very broadly defined, and so we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then we're going to talk about some specific programs and services and some of the trends and buzzwords that we're seeing in the system today. And then we're going to talk about a concept called correctional econometrics, which basically is talking about the investment, the cost of programs, as well as compared to their value. So let's go ahead and get started. When we are defining treatment, basically treatment is broadly defined as anything that is done in an attempt to change or correct an offender's habits, characteristics, or attitudes, their behaviors, anything that's done to alter what we refer to as criminogenic factors. And if you've had the class criminology, or you'll be having the class criminology, basically that class is about theory and how different theories have been developed to explain criminal behavior. Criminogenic factors are basically where we take those theories and those issues and causes and factors and bring them down to the individual level and figure out, okay, what is it, or what do we think is contributing to this individual's crime patterns? Why do they commit crime? And ultimately, treatment is anything that is, or any means done to try to alter or change those factors. We do that by assessing what are known as risks and needs, and we'll talk about those more in just a little bit. Now, ultimately, some people will still argue whether or not treatment is effective. Is it worth it? Like I said, we'll talk about that more at the end of the lecture. But one of the things that we know is that there's a lot of myths around treatment. The first myth has to do with risk factors, and in this general idea is that the lower risk an offender is, the more effective treatment will be. When actually, statistically, we know just the opposite is true. High-risk offenders basically show lower recidivism rates after treatment. Some believe that even a little bit of a program or a little bit of a treatment program is good, when actually if an offender does not complete the treatment program, we see very little impact on recidivism rates. And so getting offenders to complete the program is really become one of our primary goals. We also have this myth that if someone is being forced to go to treatment, it won't be effective. When actually, statistically, we know that those who are forced or who are not there maybe on their own free will do at least as well as compared to those who are there on their own free will or voluntarily. So in this module, there's a section called Risk, Needs, and Responsivity. And so I wanted to spend just a couple minutes and explain what that is. Now, risk and needs are pretty self-explanatory. Risks are basically anything that makes us vulnerable, anything that puts us at risk of committing crime. And so again, these are those criminogenic factors, things like having an extensive criminal history, not having a stable job, not having a high school diploma, having chemical dependency. All of those are risks. They're things that make us vulnerable. Needs are areas sometimes tied to risks, but are areas that we can show improvement. So for example, attending chemical dependency is going to address the risk of being chemically dependent, so our need is having chemical dependency treatment. Our risk would be not having a high school diploma, and so the need would be to focus on maybe some educational goals. And so basically we look at offenders' risks and needs really thoroughly. We also want to make sure we are being responsive or demonstrating a concept called responsivity, where this is really taking into consideration individual aspects. So for example, if we've determined that someone needs more of an outpatient chemical dependency program, and so one of the things we might have in our area is AA. If you are familiar with AA, you know that it has a very religious-based foundation. Let's say our client is an atheist. AA might not be the best fit for them. So responsivity is really taking into consideration that individual and how are they going to respond to some type of program. If we have a chemical dependency program that's heavy on doing different readings and then reflecting on those readings, if our client is illiterate, then we're not being responsive to their individualized needs. So responsivity is really becoming a key aspect in doing a thorough assessment. We also know that we have what are known as dynamic and static factors. So when we're talking about all those risks and needs, we also need to differentiate whether or not they are dynamic or static. Dynamic factors are things that can be changed. I can change your educational level, or I can give you the resources to change your educational level. Dynamic factors are if you're currently dealing with addiction, you are currently using chemicals. That's a dynamic factor. That can be something that can be changed. So dynamic factors obviously have a huge influence, but they are things that we can develop a plan to deal with. Static factors are things that I can't do anything about. The fact that someone's mother sold them in exchange for drugs when they were 5. I had a client once still dealing with some significant levels of trauma because of that. That's a static factor. I can't change that. However, obviously it's impacting that offender, and I can maybe get the offender in contact with some resources to help deal with that trauma, but that's a factor, and it definitely influences their programming and their opportunities for success, but they're not necessarily things that I can be changed. If someone has another offender I worked with, he had been deep into addiction and was overdosed or had overdosed at one point, and ended up having a couple seizures because of his overdose. Those seizures dramatically influenced his or damaged his brain. And so I can't do anything about your brain injury. So that's a static factor, but obviously it's going to influence what type of programming or treatment we are going to recommend. One of the primary tools that we are seeing being used across the country is referred to as the Level of Service Case Management Inventory. Now, in your textbook, they talk about the LSI, the Level of Service Inventory. That is also a tool that's used across the country. The LSCMI is actually just an update to that particular tool. And ultimately, this is a risk and needs assessment. And so what it does is it has several different scales. And so on the one side, the left-hand side of your screen, as I'm looking at your screen, has the differing areas that we are going to assess for risk and needs. So criminal history, education, employment, family, marital, leisure, recreation, companions, alcohol, drug problems, antisocial patterns, criminal behavior attitudes, and barriers to release. On the other column, there are the extras that the tool has, and a lot of times these are going to be more for the practitioner, the probation officer who is giving this assessment and then responsible for the follow-through and the aftercare. So it has a great case management plan. We can outline what our goals are and how we're going to achieve those goals, and then it also has like a data management, so we can input notes on their progress. If they are discharged, we can include a summary. If they have specific risk and needs factors that we want to make sure are always front and center, it gives us an area that we can put those on. If the person has had a prison experience, or if this tool is being used inside of a prison, we can include some of the factors that might play a role into the treatment plan there. And then if there are special responsivity factors, things like brain injuries or history of abuse or trauma that we believe is going to impact their success on programming, we can make those notes there, and so they're always in, and then we can incorporate that into the total plan. One of the things that we really want to focus on is what are the offender's strengths. And ultimately, sometimes these strengths are really hard to identify because, to be quite honest, depending on the offender and in their criminal history record, sometimes it's really difficult to find strengths. But ultimately, we always want to find something that can be identified as a strength. And basically, if any of those areas are low risk or not much of a need, we can then really focus on that as being a strength. And the bottom line is our goal is to maximize our strengths and minimize our weaknesses. So let me go ahead and switch screens here. And this is something that I will be sending. I'll probably post it in the discussion forum if I haven't already, depending on when you watch this. So this is just a sample printout. So this is an entire computerized program. I just got a hard copy to be able to show you. So this is a sample profile report. The name is just JJ. He is a 30-year-old male. And so scrolling down, so this first page is just some real basic background information, what they're currently being charged with, a little bit about their prior offenses, things that we know about that have gone through the criminal justice system, if there was a co-accused, if they had a partner in crime, literally. Then ultimately, the first, at the top of this next page, you see their overall rating. And so this is taking into consideration both risk and needs. And you see this particular offender is being rated at a 38 out of 43. So he meets the very high risk and needs. So he's got a very, very high risk and very, very high needs. So that's his overall score. But then what I really like about this tool is it breaks it down under those 8 primary categories. And you see he's ranking either high or very high. So again, this particular offender has some very, very high needs. Criminal history, he's high. Could be higher, but he has a significant criminal history. He has some significant educational and employment needs. He has not had stable employment, and he probably doesn't have a high school diploma, or if he has a high school diploma in testing, he tested at lower than a 9th grade level is generally what we'll see there. His family and marital status is considered very, very high risk. And so what that generally tells me is based on the questions, he probably answered that he is not satisfied with his family or marital status right now, or his family is not supportive of him. He may not have much contact with his family. Leisure and recreation, what generally gets you a score of high or very high means that you don't have socially acceptable leisure activities or recreational. What I generally find is that what these folks do for fun is drugs with their friends. And so, or going out and committing crime with their friends. So they don't have legal, socially acceptable ways of having fun. The next one is companions. Very high. Basically, for the most part, this person hangs out with other criminals. And so obviously that makes it a very, very high risk area. Alcohol or drug problems. For this one, he admitted to using drugs probably, with my best guess based on how the questions go, he probably admits to using drugs every single day. Pro-criminal attitudes. This one generally is that the person doesn't necessarily see anything wrong with what they are doing. In antisocial patterns, even when they're not committing crime, they may not have the best social skills, or they're they're very bucky, for a lack of better terms, of what we consider norms in our society. And that could be anything from just not wanting to park in a parking spot. If the parking spots, I've had a guy and it was just one way for him to buck the system, which, it is what it is. Our job is not to judge. Our job is just to take what we have and then try to come up with a plan. So if the parking spots are like this, he would park this way. He had an old beat up car. It wasn't that he was trying to avoid door dings. He just was bucking the system. And, considering that he can't even park in a pro-social or norm way, obviously we got a lot of issues. By the way, he's in prison. Not one of my greatest success stories. So again, we have the different categories that we are looking for. Here's just a real snippet of some of the answers that he gave. Again, criminal history, definite needs and risks for education and employment. You know what he never employed for a full year, never had a job for a full year. He's never had a job for a full year, had been expelled from school. So lots of challenges there. We've already talked a little bit about family matter, leisure, companions, again, very much criminal acquaintances, alcohol and drug problems, several yeses there. So again, this person has very, very high needs. Here's so the 43, it's actually a little bit few more than that because there's sub-questions. Breaks down how they answered to each one. Once you get very, very familiar with this assessment, like for example, I know exactly what question 42C is asking. But again, we have this computerized program. It makes it very, very handy. The next section, so section 3, 4, 5, when I was talking about those other factors that might be applicable, that's where we're going to list them. And so again, this is a tool that truly has revolutionized how we do risk and needs. It's very, very comprehensive, looking at influence an offender, and has made my in probation a whole lot more streamlined and also much more consistent. And so we're really, really excited about that tool. All right, so when we're talking about types of programs, one of the current buzzwords in the system is cognitive behavioral modification. All right, so sounds really big words, really fancy words. Really, when you break it down, so cognitive is your thinking, how you think. Behavior is how your thinking impacts your behavior. Your thinking impacts what you're going to do. And modification is just changing. So ultimately, what cognitive behavior modification is an attempt to change your thinking patterns. Because the underlying or the foundation or the underlying premise is that if we can change how you think about something, then we're going to affect your behavior. And your behavior is what's criminal. I can think about committing crime all the time. It's my behavior that is what's going to get me in trouble. Just having criminal thoughts isn't necessarily criminal. It rarely is criminal. It never is criminal. It's when we act on those thoughts that it becomes a problem. Now, let me give you an example of cognitive behavior modification in its most simplest form. So let's say you have 5 speeding tickets. Your license has now been suspended for speeding. And ultimately you speed, and when you get caught speeding, it's on your way to work. And so rather than changing, thinking I have to speed, changing the thinking pattern, saying, okay, why is this happening? What are the underlying factors? How about you get up 10 minutes earlier? So you're ready 10 minutes earlier. You can leave 10 minutes earlier. Then you don't have to speed. That's cognitive behavior modification. Thinking about it differently, saying, okay, no, I need to get up 10 minutes earlier so I don't have to speed. That's probably one of the simplest examples of what cognitive behavior modification is. If we can change your thinking patterns, we can then ultimately change your behavior. And the bottom line is this reduces recidivism, and that's really our underlying goal. Now, in the discussion, a couple different discussions actually, and in the announcements as well, I've talked about Dr. Philip Zimbardo. And again, he is a psychologist, and I am a huge Philip Zimbardo fan. I think as far as studying human behavior, he has taught us more about the criminal mind than many other psychologists put together. However, someone else who ranks very, very high on my list is Dr. Stanton Saminow. And he has written several books as well as developed several different programs. Probably his most popular book is Inside the Criminal Mind. And ultimately what this book is about is a completely different way of looking at crime. He looks at crime as a conscious choice rooted in errors in thinking. And again, really is the root of this cognitive behavior modification, saying if we can change how an offender thinks about things, we can change how they respond. One of the programs he's developed is True Thought. Another program he's developed is Commitment to Change. And his most recent program is Good Intentions, Bad Choices. Now, Good Intentions, Bad Choices is actually an updated version of Commitment to Change. He has that highly, highly copyrighted. And so, however, I wanted to give you just a little sneak peek of what his program is about. And he's produced a video series to help train the trainers, so the practitioners working in prisons, working in probation, on working with offenders. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to watch just a couple video clips of the 3 different stages of commitment to change. So please look past these. This particular series was developed in the 90s, which is why Dr. Samanow, is willing to release them for public viewing, and it's just a preview. So please look past their clothes, their hairstyles, their glasses, and really just look at the content, because in Good Intentions, Bad Choices, the content hasn't changed. He's just updated to be more closely to where we're at today. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears. This should start automatically. And bear with me one moment.
You're expressive. You clearly know right from wrong. You probably know the laws better than I do. So the question that would be logical to ask is, why is it that people who are smart, who are intelligent, come back again and again?
I got back into the same crowd, the same situation that I left from when I first came to the penitentiary. If I hadn't got back into that, or hadn't thought about that when I was out, I don't think I'd be back now. Even though I'm an intelligent person, I still was thinking the same way I was when I first got arrested. And when you think the same, you go back and you do the same things again. It's as simple as that.
So what you're saying, and don't let me, well, I know you won't let me put words in your mouth, that it has to do with the way you were thinking.
Yeah, it was my thinking, because I went out with the same thinking pattern that I came in with. I thought that I could go out and do the same things and not be involved in the same situation, which is, it doesn't work that way.
Well, it's all revolves around how you think, how you see yourself. Once you come to the conclusion that you can't change, that this is truly you, this is what you do, your whole purpose in life is to serve as a bad example, you will live up to those expectations.
So if somebody wants to change, how do they change? Well, one very important part of change is to pay attention to your thinking, because what you do really is a result of the way that you think. There are certain mistakes that we make in our thinking, what I call errors of thinking. Some of you volunteered to be interviewed on camera so that what we could do would be to put the interview up on the screen. The purpose was not to put you on the hot spot, but so that you could look at the tape yourself, almost like looking in a mirror. And so you could become aware of what mistakes in thinking you're making. So what we're going to do now is to watch a videotape. And I'd like you to look at it, and I would like you to tell me, what are the mistakes that you see in the thinking in this interview? Dennis, how do you happen to be here at this institution?
Oh, I was sentenced to the Department of Corrections for second-degree murder.
How many years do you have?
I've presently got in 14 and a half years total incarceration.
And how long do you have as a total sentence?
30 to 40.
Can you give me, in a short answer, what the motive was for you to commit murder?
Anger. A lot of frustration and a lot of anger that has built up from childhood.
From childhood because of what?
A lot of neglect, a lot of deprivation of, say, love and, parent caring. I was really hyperactive and kind of out of control. Getting in trouble, going around the neighborhood and wreaking havoc.
How old?
I was 7, 8, and 9 years of age, and it had gotten to the point to where my stepfather had sent me to a foster home.
And when you were in the foster home, did the wreaking havoc continue?
Yeah, it got worse.
And so if we looked at your whole life, it was a pattern where it got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And ended up in murder. Could you explain that more for me?
Well, as a child, when I wanted to share the affections that I had to my father or stepfather, I was turned away. And that built frustration within me, and I really felt rejected and neglected as a child to a parent when I would see my friends and their parents react in a parent-child situation that I wanted to be in, and that really frustrated me that I couldn't share the same affections with my father.
So you took it out on the rest of the world, is what you're saying.
That's true.
All right, so
All
the
right.
first part of the video series really, oops.
Look at that. And as you are watching yourself on that screen, is there anything that you have to say about thinking?
All right, sorry about that. So the first part of his program is to help offenders identify what he calls their errors of thinking. And again, this is the foundation of the cognitive behavioral modification, because ultimately we want to get the offender to the point of understanding why they have these errors of thinking. And sometimes it's a lot of soul searching, but to really help them identify those errors of thinking. Once we've done that, we can move on to step 2, which here is just a video preview of that.
During the same role play at the women's facility, the two players came up with another tactic, another way to block change.
We've gotten you a bus pass, I've given you schedules, I've set up interviews, and you repeatedly don't go. You just blow it off like it doesn't even matter. Do you
Well,
want
it
to
does-
stay out?
Yes, I do. It does matter to me, but I would like to work outside. That's the kind of work I like doing.
Well, I'm sure we would all like to have a primo job that makes us extremely happy, but right now you need to get it together. You need to get something that's going to work for you so that you can get on your feet, so that you don't go back into the system, so I don't have to sit here with handcuffs and lock you up again and throw you back in.
Do you like your job?
What did you observe the parolee doing that is an obstacle to change?
She was very defensive and very aggressive there at the end when she turned around and she said, well, do you like your job?
Well, you have just identified another tactic. When the parolee turns to the parole officer and says, do you like your job, this is really a diversion from the point. I mean, what does this have to do with anything? Nothing at all. What it does is, again, it gets the focus off the parolee, and it makes it whether the parole officer likes her job, as if that matters in this situation.
Do you like your job?
Diversion, changing the subject, another way to steer attention away from ourselves. Back at the men's facility, the group considers examples of diversion.
94, I was on parole, and I was working at the Red Lobster, making cash every night, and my girlfriend would be at home when I would come home, and I'd walk through Capitol Hill, and I'm a crack addict, so coming through Capitol Hill, if you know anything about that area, it's crack infested. And after about 6 weeks, I fell. I relapsed. I bought some crack one night, And when I came back, she knew I had cash every night, and she knew that I would have anywhere between 130, 150, anywhere in that area. So the first thing I did when I walked in is I gave her $40 to try to keep her from asking me about the rest of the money.
Can you tell me why then diversion as a tactic gets in the way of change big time?
It allows you to look at everything except for the problem at hand. It allows you to one, take control of the situation to where you don't have to look at yourself. You have some other thing that you're doing to keep far away from possible the truth of the matter.
Diversion is really a control tactic because you are the one who knows. You are the one who has the person in the palm of your hand as you are telling that person certain things to lead that person off track. Other thoughts about how diversion as a tactic interferes with change?
You're lying to yourself, you're lying to other people all around you. Again, you know, it's for myself, I lied a lot before. You know, it'd be just getting me back in the same cycle all over again. You know, and then I'd start doubting myself again, and then it'd just be one excuse after another.
When I'm using diversion against somebody, what would keep me from changing them is I enjoy it. I actually enjoy using it. I mean, I see the power, I see the thrust of, yeah, I got another one bites the dust again, I won. You know, that keeps me a lot from wanting to change by using them tactics.
Good point. There's an excitement to it.
Yes.
That you can really get somebody going and just watch them right before your very eyes. So really diversion isn't just shifting the subject, but it's the power, it's the control, it's turning something back on somebody. By diverting attention away from ourselves, the issue is never faced.
Diversion is another way of changing the subject, moving the spotlight away from ourselves. Diversion is a way of controlling others, and diversion is a way of lying to ourselves to change.
So oftentimes I classify the offenders that I've worked with as master manipulators. And it's really important for them to understand what tactics they use to manipulate a situation, because ultimately, again, and until we recognize it and understand it, we can't stop it. And so what I really like about part 2 is once we've identified their errors of thinking, we then can identify what tactics they use to manipulate or divert, to use diversion. So then let's look at the last clip.
Can you think of an incident there where you victimized someone that really stands out in your mind?
Well, that all started out kind of like fun and games. You know, me and a few friends would go out almost every evening and rob people with a fake gun. Particular time we robbed this girl, and they went inside the house, man, and they were forcing this woman to do things that wasn't right, you know. Actually, they really raped the woman, you know, but I mean, I had my wife at home, and I wasn't into that, you know, and it was like, man, what you guys doing, man? This ain't part of the thing. Just get the loot. Let's go, you know. And they actually raped her, you know, and they made the woman have oral sex with them and stuff like that, and it was like, man, y'all are sick, you know. But I did get some jewelry from her, from my wife, and I gave it to my wife, and she asked me where I got it from, and that kind of bothered me, though, that I was giving my wife jewelry from that woman, you know. And I wish I could kind of find that woman and make an amends to her, you know, for that, even though I never touched her sexually, you know.
Who would be willing to come up and play the victim of this crime? There you go. Okay, come on up. So what we would like for you to do is try to imagine how that would have impacted your life, and maybe even how it's impacting it still, and tell Curtis about that.
When you guys came into my house with those men, and even though you personally didn't touch me or violate me, I felt violated by everybody that was there. You could have done something to help me, and you saw what was happening, and you didn't do anything, and I was helpless. I was just one woman against all those men, and you just stood by and watched what they did to me, and then you even took my stuff. And I took all my self-esteem. I felt violated. I'm scared to death of men now. I don't trust people, and I live in constant fear all the time. I keep all my doors locked. I don't trust anybody. I don't feel safe in my own home. I've moved. I don't trust anybody, and to drown all the feelings I feel inside, the violation, the pain, the anger, just the rape itself is just so much. I can't deal with that on a sober basis. I'm in my addiction now too. My family's just watched me go down the tubes, and it breaks their heart. I'm just really scared of life now. I'm scared of everything.
Do you understand how this victim feels, Curtis?
Of course. I know how it makes me feel.
How's that?
Pretty bad, you know.
Well, and I want to say, too, that there's nothing we can do in a role play that really can even begin to capture the pain and suffering that an event like this causes to victims and to their families. If you take a seat. Who would be willing to come up now and role play a neighbor of this victim? Okay. Tell us how this crime has affected you and your community.
I watched a girl who was a vibrant young lady, who was a contributing member of society, happy, joyful, good neighbor, go just into an emotional mess. Somebody that couldn't even stay in her own place, couldn't associate with anybody, couldn't laugh anymore, couldn't look at anybody in the eye. You destroyed a life. You destroyed a person spiritually and emotionally.
All right, so again, I'm a big fan of Stanton Saminow. I've worked personally with Commitment to Change, and I really, really like the program. Another option is called therapeutic communities. We've talked a little bit about these already when we talked about specialized housing units. Basically, this is a lot of times used in prison where the entire housing unit might be working or focused on something like drug treatment. And so a therapeutic community is basically everything they do from the morning time they wake up in the morning, in eating their meals, they prepare their meals together. It's very much 24/7 is based on their treatment goals. All right, shifting gears a little bit, talking about prison programs. Surely keeping offenders busy is very important, both for the function and the safety of the facility, in the operation of the facility, as well as their future upon release. And so one of the ways we keep offenders busy is through work details. They might have a job within the institution, whether it be in the kitchen, janitorial, or any other work detail in the institution. Some facilities do provide opportunities for very low-risk offenders to leave the facility and participate in community service. Some prisons have industry where they allow offenders to learn a trade. For instance, barbering, masonry are two very popular options. And ultimately, all of these, they do get paid to work in these jobs. However, most institutions do require a significant percentage of their earnings, even though they don't make much, to go towards if they have victims and owe restitution or supporting their family. And so we do see most facilities participating in that. We've already talked a little bit about education. We know that illiteracy is 2.5 times greater than the general public in prison. And so educational needs are very, very high. There's an association called the Correctional Education Association, which really focuses on consistency and continual improvement on the educational programs that are offered in prison. But the bottom line is we know the most effective program at reducing recidivism is increasing educational rates. As far as recreation goes, again, love it or hate it, I know lots of people don't think there should be any recreational opportunities in prison. I would challenge you to work in a prison that didn't allow these type of opportunities. We know that recreation is not necessary for your physical as well as your emotional health. They need to blow off steam just like everyone else. And so I wouldn't want to work in a facility that didn't allow that opportunity. Healthcare, we've already talked a little bit about. Of course, the Eighth Amendment does require us to provide healthcare. However, inmates have what is known as the principle of least eligibility, and I talked about that in a previous lecture. The bottom line, we spend billions a year on corrections, incarceration programs. We spend billions of dollars a year. Basically, how that breaks down, we spend anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 to incarcerate someone for 1 year. And that is dependent on the security level of the facility as well as the programs. To build a cell, many people with overcrowding say, well, just build a new prison. With whose money? It costs $80,000 to build on average one cell. And so those are some of the things we need to take into consideration. Yes, we have tried, charging inmates, booking fees, co-pays, those types of things. The bottom line is that doesn't even put a dent into what the system costs. But really, again, we need to look at what is known as correctional econometrics. This is a business term. It's return on investment. We know programs are expensive, but they reduce recidivism. And so correctional econometrics is really figuring out and balancing the cost of the program and our return in figuring out if this program is effective enough based on cost at reducing recidivism. The one thing we always need to keep in mind, and it's just shy of 99% of offenders will be released at some point. And with that, the average jail sentence is about 7 months. The average prison sentence is 2.25 years. So relatively quickly, offenders are being released from jail or prison. And so we really need to take into consideration, how do we want them to be when they get out? If we want them to go right back to crime, then don't offer any programs. Don't offer any way for them to help themselves. But ultimately, if we want them to at least have a better chance at having a reduction in recidivism rate, then we really need to take into consideration the programs and what programs are effective. All right, so that is all I have for